I was sitting on the veranda, sipping hot coffee from my favorite mug, when I heard the light pattern of bare feet on the wooden floor. A moment later, small arms grabbed my leg, and I smiled and leaned down. "Max, you promised to help me build a ship." The voice was full of determination, and the boy's blonde curls were disheveled in the wind. I placed the mug on the railing and picked him up. "So this is where you've been hurrying since this morning, Leo?" I asked, raising it above my head. The kid laughed loudly. "Yes, we need the fastest ship, so that we can swim far, far away. You're a sailor, Max. You know everything about ships, sailor." I chuckled. "Well, maybe a little. But for such a journey, we will need a special ship. Ready to help me build it?" Leo nodded vigorously and jumped out of my arms, immediately grabbing my palm. I couldn't help but smile. "Then let's go to Mom, have breakfast, and go in search of materials." The house smelled of coffee and fresh baked goods. I noticed Lily standing at the stove, stirring something in a pot, her long brown hair in a loose braid, and a slight smile on her face. I felt calm in this house. There were no demands, no reproaches. Here I was needed not as a source of money, but as a person. Lily turned around and met my gaze. Her warm brown eyes, which always conveyed concern, lingered on me a little longer than usual. "Good morning, Max," she said, coming closer and lightly touching my hand. "Good," I replied, leaning down to steal a light kiss from her. Leo, who was already sitting at the table, impatiently tapped it with his spoon. "Max, we can't have breakfast forever. We need a ship." Lily laughed, and I nodded to the baby. Okay, Captain. As soon as we eat, we'll go to work." After breakfast, we went to the shed where I stored various boards and tools. Leo was running around, excited about the upcoming construction. "Max, will the ship have a sail?" he asked, enthusiastically picking through the small pieces of wood. "Certainly. A real ship cannot exist without a sail," I smiled, picking up suitable boards. We spent several hours working together. I sawed the boards, and Leo brought nails and tools, sincerely helping in everything he could. Every time I looked up, I saw Lily watching us from the window, her face lit up with a soft smile. When the ship's hull was ready, Leo clapped his hands with delight. "He's almost real. Now we need to paint." "Yes, but first, let's make a mast," I said, handing him the rope. We continued to work, and with each passing moment, I felt myself becoming more and more attached to this boy and this life. At some point, I raised my head and met Lily's gaze again. In her eyes, I saw love not restrained, inexpressive, but open and warm, the one that I had been looking for so long. I loved her too, without a doubt, without looking back. This was my second attempt at love, but this time I was sure. This is a real, strong haven in which I found my home. Here, among the shavings and the sun, I was truly happy. Sitting in the shade of a spreading palm tree at the edge of the beach, I watched the sun break through its long leaves, drawing light reflections on the sand. A warm breeze carried the smell of salt and seaweed from the shore, mixing with the aroma of fresh wood that our unfinished ship smelled like. Leo and I had just decided to take a short break from work, and he grabbed a brush and ran off to paint a flag for our future ship. His laughter echoed along the beach, merging with the splash of the waves, and I was left alone with my thoughts. I haven't often allowed myself to look back, but today, on this quiet afternoon, the memories came flooding in like waves that couldn't be stopped. I closed my eyes, allowing myself to drift back into the past for a moment. I grew up in a small apartment on the outskirts of the city, where the walls were thin and the nights were long and restless. Our house was in a typical American apartment complex, rows of identical brick buildings, peeling paint on the stair railings, trash cans at every entrance. The neighbors lived much the same way as we did. Work, bills, rare joys in the form of a Saturday barbecue or a trip to the supermarket when you could afford a can of soda or a candy bar. Mom worked 2 jobs, during the day at the supermarket at the checkout, and in the evening she cleaned offices in the center. I often woke up in the middle of the night from the creaking of the front door. It was she who was returning home, tired, with aching legs, but still found the strength to look into my room, kiss me on the forehead, and cover me warmly. Sometimes I heard her quietly counting money at the kitchen table, sorting through a stack of bills. The light from the old refrigerator spilled into the dark room, and her face was focused, tired, but unshakable. There was always not enough money. We ate macaroni and cheese, cans of baked beans, peanut butter on white bread, food that was cheap but filled our stomachs. Sometimes on weekends, my mom would let us grab one pizza from Domino's or fry burgers at home. It was a real holiday. On Friday night, I watched shows on TV with her, Wheel of Fortune or Jeopardy, and for a moment it seemed to us that life was not so hard. My father left when I was only a year old. He did not want obligations, did not strive for family life, but craved freedom. When the responsibility for his family became a burden for him, he simply disappeared, leaving no explanations or farewell words. For a long time, I could not understand why he chose this path, but over time I realized some people are simply not ready to be parents, no matter how they seem at first. I have seen other families live differently. Sometimes I stayed with friends, and their houses seemed like something from another world. They had full refrigerators, snacks that no one hid, a PlayStation in the living room, huge sofas where you could lie around without the fear of accidentally breaking something. Their parents drove large subs, picked them up from baseball practice, and stopped at Chick-fil-A or McDonald's for dinner. These little things seemed like an unattainable luxury to me. But I didn't envy, I dreamed. One evening when I was 12, I stood at the window, looking at the neighbor's family. Father, mother, and two children laughed as they set the table in the yard. They lit little lanterns, grilled hot dogs, and children ran barefoot across the lawn, laughing. They looked so happy, so real. At that moment, I swore to myself that someday I would have my own home, strong as a stone fortress, in which no one would be afraid of tomorrow. I imagined how I would come home from work, see my smiling wife, and hear the sonorous laughter of my children. It was more than a dream, it became a goal that led me all my life. I knew I would have to work harder than others, but I was ready, because I no longer wanted to live in a world where the electric bill could mean a hungry week, where sneakers were worn out because new ones were too expensive, where my mother worked until exhaustion and still had to buy food at discounts. So I learned to work. At first, he delivered newspapers, then he worked at a gas station, wiping car windshields and filling tanks. At 15, he got a job at Walmart, where he arranged goods on shelves, and later in a small cafeteria, where he learned to make coffee and listen to other people's stories. I gave every salary to my mother, leaving a little for travel and rare trips to the movies with friends. I vowed that my family would never know what fear of tomorrow was like. After graduating from school, I understood that without education, it would be difficult for me to make my way in life. We had no savings, neither my mother nor, of course, me. When I applied to several local colleges, I knew that without financial aid, I would not be able to attend. I filled out everything I could. FAFSA for federal aid, grants, scholarships. I was lucky enough to receive some financial aid and was able to take out a student loan. It was scary, tying yourself up with debts when you don't even know how to repay them. But I understood that without this choice, I had no future. I moved from my hometown of Elm Ridge to a larger downtown, Bridgetor, where the state university was located. I chose a practical college, since studying here was cheaper than in prestigious institutions. I couldn't afford campus housing, so I rented a tiny apartment on the outskirts, in a complex where the walls were as thin as when I was a kid and the neighbors weren't always sober. I went to classes during the day and worked in the evenings. At first, I got a job at a gas station. I carried boxes, washed car windows, and sometimes replaced cashiers. It was a tedious job, but I was paid minimum wage and every cent mattered. A couple of months later, I found another part-time job in a cafe where I fried burgers and washed dishes. Sometimes, when random opportunities arose, I worked part-time at a construction site unloading trucks, helping paint fences, carrying bricks. These night shifts were hard for me. I returned home at 2 or 3 in the morning, collapsed on my creaky bed, and a few hours later got up again to study. I drank cheap coffee from convenience stores and lived on frozen meals that I microwaved. but I held on. Every month I saved a little money for a ticket home, trying to visit my mother in Elm Ridge as often as possible. She always greeted me with a smile and set the table with homemade food, which I missed so much. We sat in the kitchen for a long time, talking about everything. It was important for her to know that I was coping, and for me to see that she did not feel alone. In college, I studied economics and business management. I can't say that this topic really fascinated me, but I saw it as a tool. I understood that if I wanted to break free, I needed to understand money, how it works, how to invest it, and how not to lose it. I was especially interested in the finance courses. For the first time, I understood how to manage expenses, how not to waste money. One of the professors once told us, "The main rule of money is to work for yourself and not for other people's dreams." This thought stuck in my head. It was in college that I met Oliver Wilkes, a guy with the same fiery desire to escape his past life as I had. He studied to become a lawyer and had incredible persistence. We quickly found a common language. We both grew up in families where there was always not enough money. We both understood that we could only count on ourselves. We sat for a long time in the library, discussing not only lectures, but also the future, what it should be like in order to finally give us freedom. Oliver wanted to become a lawyer to defend people like us, those who are often overlooked by the system. I saw in him not just a friend, but a kindred spirit, someone who, like me, was ready to fight for his place in the sun. After graduating from college, I knew I needed to find a stable job. The diploma gave me some opportunities, but without connections and experience, I could not count on good offers. I ended up getting a job at a small construction company. It was hard physical work. I carried materials, hammered nails, and dug trenches. But I didn't complain. I knew that this was just a step up for me. I observed processes, listened to conversations between the foreman and clients, and studied how estimates were drawn up and projects were planned. A year later, I was promoted to foreman. Now I was responsible for a small team of workers, monitoring the schedule, distributing tasks. This was the first time I felt that I could manage people and be responsible for them. One day, Oliver asked me to help his uncle, Richard Wilkes, renovate his kitchen. The work was not difficult, but it required care and precision. I agreed, found two more guys from the brigade, and we got down to business together. This was my first experience of running a project on my own. I personally purchased materials, calculated the budget, and monitored deadlines. In the process, we encountered problems. The walls were crooked, the pipes needed replacing. Mr. Richard wanted to make changes at the last minute. But we managed. When the work was completed, he was delighted. He and his wife recommended us to their friends, and a couple of weeks later, they called me with a new order. Then I realized that I could work for myself. I took out a small loan and officially registered my business. The first months were hell. I worked not only with my hands, but also with my head. I had to do my own accounting, advertising, and finding clients. I posted advertisements at bus stops, created pages on social networks, and negotiated discounts on materials with local stores. My day looked like this. 6 a.m. Get up, plan work. 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. work on site. 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. meetings with clients, calculations, orders of materials. 10 p.m. to 12 a.m. paperwork, marketing, accounting. I put everything into it. I didn't allow myself to retreat. Gradually, new orders began to arrive. One client told another about us, and word of mouth started working. I hired a few more workers, and we started taking on more complex projects, major renovations, extensions, exterior work. I remember the first day I made more money than I could have at a regular construction company. It was a moment of realization. I no longer depended on my bosses. I didn't expect a promotion. I didn't accept other people's terms. I created my own reality. This is how I took the first real step in building my future. When you're building your life from scratch, you don't have time for romance. But sometimes fate throws up the most unexpected encounters when you least expect it. That day, I was working at the home of a woman named Lorraine Miller. It was an old family mansion that needed a complete overhaul. Creaky wood floors, cracked paint on the walls, outdated plumbing. Lorraine was a widow and decided to put the house in order. For me, it was a good order large enough to cover the cost of a new tool and invest a little in expanding the business. Lorraine turned out to be a friendly, but rather strict woman. She was one of those who was used to being in control. Every day she appeared at the construction site in the most unexpected places. She could simply appear behind me when I was installing a new door, or silently watch as I sanded the floors. Her gaze was attentive, appraising, but without arrogance. One afternoon, as I was finishing tiling the bathroom, a guest appeared in the house. I heard the front door slam, and then I heard a woman's light laughter. "Mom, you are as always," sounded a voice filled with warmth and slight reproach. I turned around and saw a young woman standing in the living room, hugging Lorraine. She had long dark hair, jeans, and a light sweater. Before I could say anything, another voice came from the corridor. "Lorraine, if you worry any more, I'll start to think you're having an affair with this renovation." Another girl entered the house just as young, but with lighter hair and a lively look. It was Isabella, Charlotte's friend. In her hands, she was holding a paper bag, from which came the smell of fresh baked goods, apparently from a local cafe. "Charlotte, dear, you know me." Lorraine laughed. "I just want everything to be perfect." I turned my gaze back to the tiles, trying to concentrate on my work. I'm used to clients bringing guests. Sometimes they were friends, sometimes relatives who wanted to see how the renovation was going. Usually, they did not pay attention to me, perceiving me as part of the interior, a guy in work clothes covered with construction dust. But after a couple of seconds, I felt someone's gaze. Raising my head, I met Isabella's eyes. She clearly didn't expect to see me here. "Oh, sorry, I didn't notice you," she said, slightly embarrassed. "It's okay," I replied, standing up. "I'm just doing my job." Isabella smiled. It was that same smile that instantly puts you at ease with a person. "So, you are the same master that Charlotte's mother spoke so colorfully about?" she asked, crossing her arms over her chest. I chuckled. Lorraine shook her head and took the bag of baked goods from Isabella. Isabella smiled and put another small box and 2 cups of coffee on the table. "This is for you and your workers," she said, nodding in my direction. "I think a little break and something tasty wouldn't hurt." "He's doing a great job, honey. Will you stay for tea, or are you busy?" Charlotte looked at Isabella, who shrugged, and after a second the girl looked at me again. "I think I'll stay." She smiled again, and I suddenly realized that this day could be remembered not only by good work, but also by something more. After half an hour, I took a break to go outside and stretch my back. Lorraine's house was in a good neighborhood, not upscale, but cozy, with spacious houses, manicured lawns, and tall trees along the road. I leaned against the back of my truck, lit a cigarette, and looked toward the house. Isabella stood on the porch, holding a cup of coffee in her hands and watching me. "Do you always work so fast?" she asked, going down the steps. "I'm trying," I shrugged. "I would like to finish the project on time. There is always little time, but a lot of work." She took a sip of coffee and frowned slightly. "Lorraine told us that you started your business from scratch. This is true." I nodded. "Something like this. After college, I worked in a construction company, then took on several private orders, and then I realized that I could work for myself. Since then, I've been spinning everything myself." "Impressive," she said sincerely. "Nowadays, few people really achieve something without someone's help." I chuckled. "Believe me, I had no help. All I have is work and perseverance." She was silent for a second, then looked at me a little more carefully. "Do you like what you do?" I thought about it. "I like the job. I like to build, repair, and see the results of my efforts. I like to see how houses change, how something new comes out of something old and dilapidated. In the future, buy and furnish your own home." She smiled. This conversation lasted only a few minutes, but it left me feeling as if something new had just appeared in my life. A feeling I didn't expect. The next day, when I returned to work, I found myself waiting for Isabella to appear. I couldn't wait to hear her voice again, to see her smile. The next day, I decided to meet with Oliver. We hadn't seen each other for several months, and I wanted to know how things were going with him. Besides, he was local, and I wondered if he knew anything about Isabella. Oliver worked as a lawyer at the small but respected law firm of Hunt and Partners. Ever since college, he had dreamed of becoming a lawyer, and although his business was going well, he often complained that he spent too much time in the office. When I called him, he, without hesitation, suggested meeting at Jacob's Bar, a cozy establishment not far from his work. It was a typical place where lawyers, brokers, and other office workers flocked after a long day to relax with a glass of whiskey or beer. I arrived a little earlier and took a table by the window. The bar was decorated in a classic American-style dark wooden panels, a counter behind which there was always a smiling bartender and soft, slightly dim lighting, creating a cozy atmosphere. The TVs showed news and sports games, and in the far corner there was live music playing quietly. An old man in a threadbare jacket strummed a guitar, singing old blues tunes. The room was quite lively. Several guys in shirts with rolled-up sleeves were animatedly discussing something at the counter, and an elderly man nearby was sipping bourbon, staring at the phone. In another corner sat a group of girls, laughing at something on the phone of one of them. 10 minutes later, the door swung open with a bang and Oliver walked confidently into the room. His suit looked impeccable, but I knew that despite his expensive appearance, he was still that college kid who could sit on the ground in the park and drink cheap beer straight from the bottle without any problem. Max, finally, he patted me on the shoulder and sat down opposite me. "How are you, buddy? Still up to your neck in work?" I chuckled. "As you can see, I work tirelessly. And now you are an important person, suits, documents, courts." "Oh yes, this is exactly how I imagined my adult life, 20 hours a day, sitting in the office and listening to rich people trying to sue each other," he chuckled. "But I admit, the work is interesting. Sometimes there are such cases that at least write a book." We ordered a beer each, and the conversation gradually moved on to its usual course. We discussed old acquaintances, remembered our student years, and even laughed about how we once almost got kicked out of the course for arguing with a professor about the real estate market. But at some point, I decided it was time to ask the main question. Talking about Isabella. "Listen, Oliver, do you happen to know a girl named Isabella, friend of Charlotte Miller?" he thought, twirling the edge of the napkin around his finger. "Isabella. Yes, I think I know who you're talking about. She studied at the same university as us, but was in a different department. As far as I remember, she studied art or something related to design." "Exactly?" I asked again. "Absolutely. She was always different from the rest. You know, there are people who stand out not only for their appearance, but for their energy. That's exactly what she was like. Smart, ambitious, with a lively look. Not the kind of person who just goes with the flow." I nodded, remembering her confident smile when we talked outside Lorraine's house. "What, did you meet her?" Oliver raised his eyebrows, grinning. "You can say so. I met her at one of the orders. I found her." "Interesting." Oliver narrowed his eyes and grinned. "Are you saying you finally like someone?" "Max, I was starting to worry that you liked my company more than women." I shook my head but chuckled. "I just didn't expect to meet someone like her. There's something about her." "What attracts you?" I looked at him and nodded. "Yes, maybe I can't explain it." Oliver took a sip of his beer, looking at me thoughtfully. "You know, I ran into her a couple of times at university events. She was always confident and ambitious. I think you should find out more about her." I thought about his words. "Does she have someone?" Oliver shook his head. "Don't know." This information got me thinking. Perhaps I actually had a chance to get to know her better. But before I started thinking about anything more, I needed to finish working on Lorraine Miller's house. The evening was drawing to a close. The bar filled with even more people laughing, talking, some ordering another round of drinks. Oliver looked at his watch and sighed. "I have to get up early tomorrow, and I think you will too. So let's make a deal. If you decide you want to get to know her better, I'll help you get some information. After all, I'm a lawyer. I know how to delve into details. I chuckled. If necessary, I'll contact you. We paid, went outside, where it was already noticeably colder, and went in different directions. I got into my truck, started the engine, and looked in the rearview mirror. The relationship between Isabella and I began unexpectedly, but quickly. We began to meet often at Lorraine Miller's house, where I continued to renovate, and when she came to visit Charlotte, she always stayed a couple of minutes longer than required to simply say hello. At first it seemed like an accident light, unobtrusive conversations in the hallway, fleeting smiles, short jokes. But gradually it became clear that there was a tangible spark between us. She wasn't the kind of girl who flirted or played hard to get. On the contrary, there was always confidence in her gaze. When she asked how work was going, it seemed to me that she was really interested in the answer. I felt it in every cell of my body. Her presence changed my day. Our first real date happened spontaneously. It was a normal working day. I was finishing laying the hardwood floor in Lorraine's living room when Isabella appeared at the door again. "Max, do you have plans for the evening?" she asked, smiling as if she already knew what I would answer. I looked at her, surprised. "Only if they include dinner and good company," I grinned, leaning on the hammer. She laughed. "Then great. I know one place. Meet me at 7. I nodded, feeling a strange excitement that I hadn't felt in a long time. In the evening, I arrived at a small Italian restaurant by the river that she had chosen. It was a cozy place with an open terrace, small tables covered with white tablecloths and flickering candlelight. The air was filled with the aromas of fresh pasta, olive oil, and red wine. Somewhere in the corner, a musician was playing the violin, creating an atmosphere of lightness and comfort. When Isabella entered, I noticed the waiter's gazes linger on her for a second. She looked elegant, but without unnecessary pathos jeans, a light blouse, her hair slightly disheveled by the wind. She was a natural. We ordered wine, and the conversation flowed naturally. She said the same thing as Oliver, only in more detail, that she studied design and dreamed of opening her own studio. But like many young professionals, I was just looking for opportunities to get started. She talked about her passion for creating cozy interiors and how she loves working with colors and textures. "I've always been attracted to the idea of making home a place where you want to come back," she said, looking at me over her glass. I chuckled. "You and I are doing almost the same thing. I create houses, and you make them beautiful." She nodded. "Perhaps someday we will work together." I felt like those words left something more than just a joke in the air. I told her about my journey, about how I built a business from scratch, how I carried bricks, spent nights counting estimates, closing loans, fearing that I wouldn't be able to handle it. How I learned not only to build houses, but also to manage people. She listened carefully, and for the first time in a long time, I felt that I could speak honestly, without hiding any difficulties or fears. When dessert was brought, tiramisu, which we decided to take for two, we fell silent, just enjoying the moment. From that evening, everything moved even faster. Isabella was a person who was not afraid to show her feelings. She texted me in the morning, brought me coffee when she knew I was having a long day, and called me just to find out how I was doing. I'm not used to this kind of attention. I was too busy with work. But Isabella saw. She looked at me as if she knew something about me that I myself did not yet understand. She wasn't afraid to speak up. If I was tired, she didn't say, "Oh, poor thing," she said, "Max, you need rest. Let's go somewhere for the weekend." If I doubted some work decision, she would ask, "What exactly do you want?" We were different. I am used to building my life on survival, on struggle. She lived with the feeling that the world can be changed if you have a goal. But one thing united us: the dream of a home that would truly be ours. Despite the fact that we grew up in different conditions, I did not have a father, and she, on the contrary, had a large and friendly family. We both wanted the same thing. I wanted my children to never have the fears that I had, so that they don't fall asleep hearing their mother counting the last money. She wanted to create a home that people would want to return to, where every corner will be filled with warmth and comfort. By that time, my business was already taking off. I expanded the team, started taking on large orders, and was able to close all the loans. For the first time in a long time, I had not just a job, but a future. And now that she was nearby, I began to think not only about how to earn money, but also about why I was doing it. One day, we were sitting on the roof of her house, drinking wine and watching the sun slowly disappear behind the horizon. "Where do you think you will be in 10 years?" she asked. I looked at her and, without hesitation, answered, "In a house that he built himself, with my wife and children." She smiled. "Good plan. And you?" "In the same house. With you." We were silent, looking at the evening city, and a month later I decided to propose to her. This is how my marriage began. Isabella always dreamed of a big, luxurious wedding where everything would be perfect, from exquisite decor to live music and hundreds of guests. She had imagined this day since childhood, leafing through glossy magazines, planning every detail in her head. And now that this moment had come, I knew that I wanted to do everything possible for her to make this dream come true. By then, my business was thriving. We took on large orders, I expanded the team, and financial stability finally allowed me to not count every dollar I spent. Therefore, I spared no expense to make this day truly unforgettable for Isabella. We chose a luxurious country mansion an hour's drive from the city, an old mansion surrounded by greenery, with a spacious garden and columns, like in the best American films about classic weddings. Tall oak trees grew around, white tents stood on the lawn, and garlands of hundreds of small light bulbs flickered above the heads of the guests. When the sun began to set, the entire garden was filled with a soft golden light, creating a truly fabulous atmosphere. Isabella insisted on a live orchestra, and she was right. Violins, guitars, light pianos, all this added sophistication, making the evening even more magical. The music sounded in unison with the warm summer air, with the smiles of the guests, with the ticking of champagne in the glasses. More than 100 guests gathered. These were mostly Isabella's relatives and friends. Her family was large, loud, filled with people who laughed heartily and hugged each other as if they hadn't seen each other in ages, even if they saw each other every week. There were far fewer people on my side. Basically just my mom and Oliver, but that was enough for me. I knew my family had always been small, but when I saw Oliver patting me on the shoulder and saying, "You're damn lucky, Max," and Mom sneaking away to wipe away her tears, it warmed my heart. I watched with a smile as Isabella glowed with happiness. She had always been beautiful, but that day she was simply dazzling. Her dress was sophisticated, perfectly emphasizing her figure, and the light veil gave her even more elegance. The snow-white fabric seemed weightless, and long sleeves with delicate embroidery added classic luxury to the look. She caught the admiring glances of the guests, but when her eyes met mine, I saw in them not just joy, I saw love. At the wedding, I got to know her family better. Margaret, her mother, turned out to be a warm and energetic woman who did not hide how proud she was of her daughter. She held my hand and said, "You have to take care of her, Max. She's strong, but she also needs support." Sophia, Isabella's younger sister, was the complete opposite of my wife, more explosive, emotional, with endless energy. Her husband, Andrew, seemed like a man who had gotten used to her temperament and had learned to smile about it. Aunt Clara and Uncle Robert, two incredibly charming people, knew 1,000 stories about Isabella's childhood. They told how she staged impromptu performances as a child, drew dresses for dolls, dreamed of becoming a designer, and was always the main ringleader at family holidays. I felt that they were sincerely happy for her. They accepted me, and it meant more to me than they could ever imagine. Isabella's father, William, died of a stroke 5 years ago. This day would be special for him. We honored his memory by raising our glasses in his honor. Margaret spoke fondly of what a caring husband and father he was. At some point, Isabella's eyes filled with tears, but she immediately smiled. "I know he would be proud to see me so happy," she said, squeezing my hand. This moment made the evening even more soulful. Despite all the joys, we did not forget those who were important. The ceremony took place in a surprisingly warm atmosphere. We exchanged vows in front of all the guests. I remember how her fingers trembled when she put the ring on me, how her voice trembled slightly when she said the words. "You have become my home, and I promise to be yours." I swear I have never been so calm and confident in my decision. After the official part, we moved on to the first dance. It was a moment when the whole world seemed to freeze. We moved to the sounds of "Can't Help Falling in Love," and I felt her fingers squeezing mine, her breathing even and calm. I don't remember how long this dance lasted. Maybe a minute, maybe forever. But I wanted this moment to last forever. Fun, toasts, and a long evening. After the dance, dinner began and the fun continued. We laughed, raised our glasses, took pictures, ate cake, and just enjoyed the moment. At some point, Oliver came up to me, holding a glass of whiskey in his hands. "You know, Max, I'm not surprised that you were able to build a business, but I'm surprised that you were able to find a woman who makes you smile the way you smile now." I laughed. "You know, Oliver, sometimes the right things happen not because you were looking for them, but because you were ready for them." He nodded, patted me on the shoulder, and walked away, leaving me in a circle of happy people. The night lasted a long time. We danced, sang, and had fun. The aroma of flowers and expensive wine was in the air. The laughter of the guests mixed with the music, and the sky was strewn with stars. After the wedding, our life together began, and everything seemed truly new, even though we already knew each other quite well. Isabella always dreamed of a spacious house with enough space for her family, guests, and in the future for children. I knew how important this was to her, so when we started looking for a place to live, I wanted it to be her dream home. We chose a spacious mansion in one of the quiet suburbs, where the houses were not too close to each other and the streets were surrounded by greenery. I liked that there was no noise of the big city here, that the morning began with the singing of birds and not with the horns of cars. The house had 4 bedrooms, a large kitchen with marble countertops, and a cozy living room with a fireplace, where you could gather friends and have long family evenings. Isabella enthusiastically took on the interior design. This was her element. She chose furniture, selected fabrics, and experimented with colors. Her style was impeccable, sophisticated yet cozy. I saw her eyes light up when she talked about the details, and it only confirmed that she had made the right choice in her profession. I gave her complete freedom, saying that I trusted her taste. And frankly, it was nice for me to come home, where every corner reminded me that this is not just a home, but a place that we create together. While Isabella took care of the house, I worked even harder. My business continued to grow, and now I was not only responsible for myself, but also for our life together. I knew I had to provide stability, give her the life she dreamed of. I began to take large orders, opened another construction team, and invested in new equipment. It meant long work days, but I didn't mind that. I was used to working, I was used to being tired, but now it felt different. Despite my workload, the most pleasant thing about all this was our closeness. Isabella was not just my wife, she was my support, my motivation. She often repeated that I was the best man she could meet, that I was a hard worker and a strong person. She always knew when I needed rest, when I needed moral support, and when just silence. I returned home late, tired, sometimes exhausted, but her smile instantly relieved all the stress. "How was your day, Max?" These simple words, spoken sincerely, meant more to me than any compliments. She didn't just ask, she actually listened. Every night she gave me the passion I could only dream of. Her touch, her look, her voice, everything about her drove me crazy. She was not afraid to talk about her feelings. She was not afraid to show how good she was with me. It gave me strength. I knew that everything I did was not in vain. Our nights were hot, our mornings were warm. Every evening she waited for me impatiently, and every morning she saw me off with a smile, promising that the evening would be even better. A month after the wedding, Isabella came to me with an excited look. I was in the garage, sorting out tools, when she came in, clasping her hands a little nervously. "Max, I need to tell you something." I immediately realized that this was something important. She took a deep breath and then, blushing slightly, blurted out, "I'm pregnant." For a second, I froze. We planned to live for ourselves for at least a year before thinking about children. But at that moment, I realized that nothing could make me happier. I hugged her, holding her close, and felt her relax in my arms. "Are you really happy?" she whispered, clinging to me. "Are you glad? This is the best thing that could have happened to us." I knew our lives would change forever, but I was ready. I wanted this. I knew that I wanted to see her with her belly. I wanted to hold our baby in my arms. I wanted to hear his first laugh. At the first opportunity, I went to the jewelry store. I knew that symbols were important to her, and I wanted this moment to be remembered forever. I chose a thin gold bracelet with an engraving inside. "You are my best solution." When I handed her the box, she was surprised at first. "What is this?" "Open it." She slowly opened the box, and I saw her eyes sparkle. "Oh, Max." She carefully ran her finger over the engraving, then looked at me, and I saw her lips twitch. "It's so beautiful." I took her hand and put the bracelet on her wrist myself. "You will always wear it, to remember how much I love you." She immediately called her relatives to tell them the good news. It was an ordinary day. I worked on site, supervising the guys laying new parquet in a client's country house. Summer was in full swing. The sun was hot. I was in a t-shirt and work jeans. My hands were covered in dust. At such moments, I felt alive. I loved to see how something lasting, real was created out of nothing. But then the phone rang. The hospital number appeared on the screen. At that moment, everything went cold inside me. I knew that nothing good would come out of this call. "Mr. Carter?" The doctor's voice was calm, but there was a tinge of regret in it. I clutched the phone in my hand. "Yes. I'm sorry, but your mother has passed away. Stroke." I didn't answer. Everything around became blurry. The sounds of construction disappeared. The air became thick and heavy. The only thing I could squeeze out. "A few hours ago. We did everything we could. It happened suddenly. No warnings. No farewell conversation. Without a chance to tell her how much I love her." I remember hanging up the phone and just sitting on the nearest toolbox, staring at one point. Everything I built, everything I strived for, all my victories at that moment, they did not matter at all. I've lost my footing. Organizing the funeral was pure hell. Not because it was difficult for me to decide something, but because every call, every detail reminded me that my mother was no longer there. Isabella was nearby. She held my hand and tried not to leave me alone. But even her care could not drown out the emptiness that settled inside me. I remembered how my mother worked 2 jobs, how she counted money at night, how she never complained, no matter what. Everything I did in life, I did for her. But now she is gone. When Isabella was 6 months pregnant, her mother, Margaret, came to us. She said that she wanted to help her daughter, but I knew that she had come for a reason. Margaret was a dynamic woman, a true force of nature. She always had everything under control. There was no chaos, doubt, or weakness in her world. She was the kind of person who made plans 5 steps ahead and expected everyone around her to follow them. From the first minutes changes began in our house. Margaret took over the space as if she had lived with us all her life. "The baby should sleep in a room closer to your bedroom. Max, you wouldn't mind converting the office into a nursery, would you? Is it safe to place the bed like this? I read somewhere that a child needs a certain amount of air circulation. Max, we need to move it to the window. Are you seriously eating these frozen dinners? This is terribly harmful. Max, you know that a pregnant woman needs proper nutrition, right?" I looked at her, then at Isabella, who was laughing, and realized that this was all just the beginning. One day at dinner, she suddenly looked at me carefully and said with all seriousness, "Max, you need to eat more vegetables. A man your age should take care of his health." I looked at my plate, where there was already a double portion of broccoli. "And a man in my position should take care of his mental health," I muttered, glancing sideways at Isabella. She covered her mouth with her hand, holding back her laughter. But Margaret was unstoppable. She got up earlier than everyone else. She made sure that the house was in perfect order. I checked what Isabella was eating, controlled what time I left and what time I returned. Morning. I stand in front of the mirror, buttoning my shirt. Margaret walks by, stops, and looks at me with her arms folded across her chest. Are you really going to go out in this? I blinked. What's wrong? She looked me up and down skeptically. I just thought that now that you're the head of the family, you'd look, well, more respectable. I looked at my clean, ironed shirt. I thought I would just leave the house, but now I feel like I have to rethink my life. Isabella, passing by, just laughed and patted me on the shoulder. Get used to it, my love. This is my mom. Time flew faster than I expected. It seemed like just yesterday that Isabella had excitedly told me she was pregnant, and now I was standing in the room holding our son, little Chris, in my arms. I looked at his tiny face, at the tiny fingers that were squeezing my thumb, and I couldn't believe that this little man was my flesh and blood. I always thought I was ready for fatherhood. I grew up without a father, and from childhood, I knew that my children would never experience what I had to endure. I will do everything to make them feel safe, to know that their father is nearby, that their home is a fortress in which they can be happy. 2 years later, our daughter, Emily, was born. When I first held her in my arms, I realized that a person's heart can expand endlessly, accommodating more and more love. Isabella plunged headlong into motherhood. She had changed. She no longer cared about the career and professional ambitions that she once spoke about with such fire in her eyes. I thought I'd go back to work, but it doesn't seem important to me anymore, she said one evening as we sat on the porch, watching Chris fall asleep in the stroller. Are you sure? I asked. Absolutely. Now my place is here, with them, with you, especially since you handle the finances for our family so well. I didn't mind. I loved seeing what a caring mother she became. Our house was filled with children's laughter, toys, and the smell of vanilla candles and freshly baked cookies. But soon I began to feel that something was wrong. When Emily was born, Margaret decided to stay with us longer. Isabella needs help with her 2 children, Max. This is not up for debate, she said, as if we had no say at all. I tried to argue, but it was no use. At first, it seemed logical. The first months with 2 children were indeed difficult. But then the months turned into a year, and I realized that Margaret was not going to leave. But even Margaret wasn't the biggest surprise. One evening when I returned from work, there were suitcases in the house. I walked into the living room and saw Sophia and Andrew. What's going on here? I asked, slowly entering the room. Isabella looked at me with the same look that I already knew well. We have to help them, Max, she said. This is a family. It turned out that their house was repossessed for non-payment. They lived on credit for years, did not pay bills, did not work, hoping that everything would somehow be resolved. Now it was up to us to decide. Sophia and Andrew moved into one of the guest bedrooms, rearranged the living room furniture, stocked the pantry with extra food, and their water and electric bills doubled. But it didn't end there either. A couple of months later, Frank appeared at the door. Max, I have a brilliant business idea, he exclaimed at dinner, waving some kind of paper covered in writing. I sighed heavily. This was Frank's third brilliant idea in the last 2 years. The previous 2 ended with the money simply disappearing and explanations being vague. Invest just $10,000, and in 6 months we will double the amount, he continued enthusiastically. I looked at Isabella. She looked at me with that same look. We have to help, Max, she said calmly. This is a family. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I began to feel like I was losing control of my own life. My home was no longer mine. Now every day there was endless movement in my house. Margaret prepared breakfasts, dinners, discussed everything from politics to how to properly run my business. Sophia sat in the living room, scrolling through social media and complaining that the world is unfair. Andrew promised to find a job, but somehow was in no hurry to do so. Frank kept coming up with new, brilliant ideas that required investment. I came home and didn't feel like this was my home. I couldn't sit quietly in a chair because there was always someone in the living room. I couldn't make myself coffee in the morning because the kitchen had long ceased to be my territory. I couldn't say no because every time I heard the same thing. This is family. Gradually, the children began to turn from cute angels into little racketeers who do not need their father's attention, but only financial support for their million-dollar demands. Chris declared, "Dad, I need a new motorcycle. I can't ride this bucket." Emily didn't lag behind. "I want a trip to Europe with my friends. Everyone has already been there, but I haven't." Every day there was a new "I want." The latest iPhone, designer clothes, private trainers, personal lessons, vacation trips. They no longer asked, they demanded, and it seemed that their appetites were growing every week. But perhaps the most offensive thing was that no one from this entire family ever asked what I wanted. Perhaps I should have stopped all this then, not been a weakling, put everything in its place. But then it would have meant complete defeat, divorce. The children would have remained with Isabella 100%, since she indulged all their whims and was only the one who spoiled their paradise with her eternal fatigue and lack of mood. Finances would also have to be divided in half, as well as alimony for the children and payments to Isabella, whom I so naively loved. My male ego couldn't stand it. It would be a complete collapse. Maybe that's why my naive brain and love so blindly continued to believe in a big and happy family. I've always known that people change over time. Life hardens, circumstances put pressure, habits take root. But I never thought that one day I would look back and not recognize my own wife. Once upon a time, Isabella was the very woman with whom I dreamed of spending my whole life. Kind, attentive, warm. She greeted me with a smile, with hugs, with a warm dinner, even if she was tired during the day. She looked at me with love, with admiration, as if I was a person she could rely on. And I really was like that. I solved all the questions and even more. But over time, something changed. No, not right away. It happened slowly, like drops of water that wear away a stone over the years. At first, I didn't notice. I thought that these were temporary difficulties, fatigue, children, everyday life. But then I started to see. Isabella has changed. She turned into her mother. I once thought Margaret was a temporary phenomenon. I was wrong. She didn't just stay in our house, she took up residence in Isabella's head. Tone, intonation, claims everything became hers. "Why are you so late again? Do you ever go home? I'm tired, I've been with the children all day, and all you know is that you're working." If earlier she appreciated my efforts and, on the contrary, said that this was all very important, thank you for everything, now she took them for granted. No, of course I understand. Marriage is not an eternal honeymoon. These are not constant declarations of love and passionate nights. This is routine, compromises, mutual assistance. But I didn't think that mutual assistance would turn into one-way traffic. I work 12, 14 hours a day to maintain this house, pay the bills, and provide comfort. And she just complained. If in the first years our nights were full-blooded, hot, real, now the bedroom has turned into Antarctica. Once upon a time, she reached out to me, kissed me, whispered words that made my blood boil. Now there was only silence and cold in the bedroom. I'm tired. The children are exhausted. Let's not today. And not today became forever. We still slept in the same bed, but it was as if an invisible wall had grown between us. "Well, maybe we can just hug," I once suggested. She looked at me like I was an idiot and said, "Max, I'm hot." The woman who had previously been looking for an excuse to cuddle up to me was now looking for a reason to stay away. I even began to doubt whether I was breathing something deadly in my sleep. Maybe I snore. I asked Oliver one day when we were sitting at the bar. "No, brother," he grinned. "You're just married. Although, after a couple of unsuccessful attempts to build a family, I realized that everything is fair. I give money, they give sex. The economy is pure water without illusions. It's just that the investment doesn't pay off." "It's just that my investments aren't paying off," I said. We both laughed, but I knew there was some truth to it. Isabella and I became like neighbors who live in the same apartment but lead different lives. "How was your day?" I asked one evening. "Ordinary." And silence. I looked at her and tried to understand what happened. How did a woman who once sparkled with joy turn into a person who could barely look me in the eye? How did we stop being a team? Our evenings began to feel like a repeating scenario. What's left? Work. Only work. I threw myself into business because it was the only thing that gave me meaning. I was respected at the construction site. Clients appreciated my work. I felt needed. What about at home? I felt out of place. I built a house in which I no longer had a place. What's next? I didn't know. Perhaps God had mercy on me, or, on the contrary, he decided to finally finish me off. Because by chance, on one of my rare days off, I learned something that I probably shouldn't have known. The day turned out to be hot. I spent the morning tending to the yard, working on the lawn mower, and then cleaning the pool. At some point, the heat became unbearable, and I decided to go into the house to take a shower and change clothes. I went up the stairs and went into the bedroom, but as I passed the slightly open door into the living room, I heard laughter. Women's laughter. It was Isabella and her friend Lauren. I didn't think much of it until I heard what they were talking about. "Oh my God, Lauren, you have no idea." Isabella's voice sounded mocking. "I can imagine that this poor Max still thinks that we're just having a cooling-off period." And she laughed. "Seriously? Is he still trying?" Lauren played along with her. "Yes, you should have seen it. Sometimes he even makes attempts to show tenderness. Imagine, recently he tried to hug me. I almost laughed right in front of him." Isabella giggled. I said I was hot. "Well, so what? To some extent true." "Well, how is your new toy?" Lauren said mockingly. "Haven't played enough yet?" "Oh, Thomas, God, Lauren, it's like going from a bicycle to a race car." Isabella's voice became lazy and dreamy. "This is not boring, sweaty, monotonous family duty. This is greed, this is hunger, this is real male power. He doesn't just try, he makes me forget how to breathe." "What's the difference?" Lauren chuckled. "Difference?" Isabella snorted. "For example, in the fact that he has a body like that of a predator, strong, hardy, tough. When he leans on me, when he presses me, I feel that there is a beast under me. Not some." She grinned, shaking her head dismissively. "Not like Max." Something cold squeezed my chest. "Are you seriously comparing him to him?" Lauren giggled. "Oh, I'm not even comparing, I just realized how faded everything was before. With Max, it's boring, monotonous, without fire. No taste. Everything was done according to the clock, according to the rules, without the slightest spark. And Thomas, he tears me up. He does it the way a real man should do it. Honestly, Lauren, I don't understand how I could have been content with measly crumbs for so many years. But you know, I did everything right. Back when I first saw him at Charlotte's house, I told my mother about him. She said, 'Take a closer look, Isabella. A man with such perseverance and hard work can provide for you. And love, it can always be found on the side.' And I did the right thing. I closed my eyes. The whole world narrowed to this room and her words. "And your poor cuckold hasn't guessed anything yet?" Lauren asked with a grin. "There's not even a hint." Isabella laughed. "He comes home from work, tired, empty, miserable. He collapses on the sofa, thinking that he has everything under control. Meanwhile, his faithful wife receives something he never even dreamed of." I took a step back. My heart was beating so hard that it seemed like it could be heard. I was betrayed. But the worst thing was the realization that for Isabella, this was not something serious from the very beginning of our relationship. It was fun. It's funny. Nothing personal, just a husband who is too busy to notice that someone else has long taken his place in bed. And I suddenly realized this woman with whom I lived for so many years, whom I provided for whom I worked, raised children, this woman never loved me. She was just waiting for the moment when I would become naive and comfortable. Perhaps I was damn naive. Perhaps for too long I played the role of a convenient husband who doesn't ask unnecessary questions. But at that moment, when all the pieces of the puzzle came together into a single picture, it dawned on me. It was not just a click in the head, It was an explosion, scattering into thousands of sparks of rage, disappointment, and cold realization. I could no longer remain that guy who is called comfortable behind my back. The one who pays the bills while his wife explores her sensuality with some tanned fitness instructor. For those who think that family life is a partnership and not endless coverage of other people's loans. It's time. It's time to stop being a free ATM with a free repair feature. It's time to regain your dignity and respect. The decision came instantly. Lauren didn't even need to explain anything. Her conversation with Lorraine said it all. Her whole posture screamed, "Well, what are you going to do now, dear?" "Well then, darling, you'll see now." I didn't mean to throw a tantrum. I wasn't going to start a scandal in the spirit of a reality show with suitcases thrown out the window and shouts of, "I know everything," against the backdrop of a lover frozen in horror. It would be a banal, too predictable ending. No threats, no scenes, no assault, although the thought of punching someone flashed, not even just one. I simply decided to turn off the switch of their comfortable life. Money. That's what kept this structure afloat. Love, trust, a future together. Hell, who needs that when you have high-limit credit cards and paid vacations? I was not their husband and father, but their personal Federal Reserve Bank, and at that moment, the best thing I could do came to me. He went outside, took out his phone, and dialed a number. Charles Hendricks, one of my former clients, once said that if I ever needed a special service, I could call him. I once saved his construction site from disaster when the contractors screwed up the foundation, and he owed me. The phone rang twice before a deep, calm voice spoke. "Max, I haven't heard from you for a long time. What's happened?" "I need a little favor, Charlie," I said, trying to speak calmly. "I think you have the right people to solve one issue." Charles was silent for a couple of seconds, then chuckled briefly. "No problem. Give me a week. Everything will be done." I nodded, put the phone in my pocket, but didn't stop there. The next number on my list was Oliver. If anyone could help me understand the details of this dirty show, it was him. "Honestly, Mike, I'm sorry," he said after I told him the whole story. "But be honest, did this really come as a surprise to you? You know my opinion about women. Everything is fair. You give money, they give sex. It's just that you haven't had either the first or the second for a long time." I grinned, although inside I was clenching with anger and bitterness. Yes, I was stupid and completely blind, I admitted. But now it's time to take action. I think you can help me. Oliver was silent for a second, then said, "Certainly. Let's discuss the details." We sorted out everything that was required quickly and clearly. After a short goodbye, I turned off the phone. Part of the plan has already begun to be implemented. And now I had a whole week to finally enjoy this circus before the curtain finally came down. Since they've been taking advantage of me for so long, why shouldn't I take advantage of the moment and enjoy myself? I decided to give myself some personal entertainment. Every morning I appeared in the kitchen in a good mood, smiling so widely that it clearly frightened Isabella and her family. He sat down at the table and sipped his coffee, starting conversations that could rival the best stand-up comedians. "Sophia, have you thought about getting a job? They say an excellent diner has opened in the city and they are hiring waiters. Although, you always said that you were created for great things. How are your modeling dreams going? I'm sure there is an agent somewhere who is looking for a woman who knows how to live at someone else's expense." Andrew, her husband, sat opposite her, his head buried in his phone, pretending that this did not concern him. I smiled at him. "Andrew, buddy, you wanted to start your own startup, right? What's your idea for an app for lazy bums?" "Oh, sorry, for optimizing home space. It seems investors haven't lined up yet." He just muttered something under his breath. My mother-in-law, of course, could not ignore my friendly conversations. She looked at me critically and said, "Max, you're acting strange." "Did something happen?" I shrugged. "No, Margaret, I'm just thinking about the future. Suddenly, we all will soon have to get used to new realities. By the way, do you know where you can rent a house inexpensively?" Yes, purely hypothetically. She frowned, but did not attach much importance to these words yet, and I enjoyed every second. They were used to seeing me as a cash cow, and I decided it was time to finally have some fun, watching them get nervous, not understanding why my tone had suddenly changed. The children were not left unattended either. Chris burst into the kitchen with the traditional demand. Dad, I need money. My friends and I are going to Miami for the weekend. I made a thoughtful face. Great idea, son. It's great that you learn how to make money so early. It will be a valuable experience. What? He stared at me as if I had just spoken Chinese. Well, you don't think I'll give you money for a party? I took a sip of coffee and smiled. I'm sure you can handle it yourself. Maybe you can get a part-time job. Chris was clearly not ready for such a turn. His mouth opened, then closed, and then he just turned around and walked away, muttering something under his breath. Emily appeared a little later with a face full of confidence. Dad, I need a new phone. Mine is already old. He came out 3 months ago, I noted. Yes, but there is already a new model. She was indignant. Lily, Jessica, and Samantha already have these. This is humiliation, do you understand? I thought for a couple of seconds and then nodded. You're right, honey. This is truly terrible. Do you know what we'll do? Take the catalog, choose any model, and put it on your gift list for next year. What? Emily lit up like fireworks. Dad, this is not serious. Well, I'm working seriously to pay for all your urgent needs, I smiled. Maybe now it's your turn. And that was just the beginning. On Monday, the first stop will be the bank. Fitness club, canceled. Favorite beauty salon, goodbye. Payment for a new BMW. Good luck finding a new sponsor. Credit cards, blocked. Joint account, closed. I decided to close access to the feeder. Everything was as easy as shelling pears. I even left a note on the kitchen table so they wouldn't have to rack their brains. Sorry, but your limit has been reached. The bank no longer issues loans without collateral. Your balance, $0. Good luck. I didn't care how they would react. Will it be a shock? Anger? Trying to call me sobbing and assuring me that I got it all wrong? Doesn't matter. The process itself was important. I turned off the phone and went to Oliver. He should have already had the documents ready to sell my business. When I entered his office, he was already waiting for me, papers laid out on the table. He looked at me over his glasses, folded his arms over his chest, and asked, "Are you sure?" 100%, I answered without hesitation. Oliver sighed heavily, shook his head, and muttered, "Damn. Then sign here." He pointed his finger at the paper. After a friendly hug with Oliver, I called a taxi and went to the third point of my plan, Charles Hendricks. We agreed to meet at the airport cafe. When I entered, he was already waiting for me at a table in the corner, calm as always. Without further ado, he silently handed me documents, my account numbers to which all my finances had already been transferred, and a plane ticket to Liberty Island. Everything is clean. No one will guess where you are or how you managed to deceive the system, he said, nodding at the papers. I took the envelope, feeling like a ton of weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Thank you, Charlie. It's not worth it, Max. You just finally did what you should have done a long time ago. I must have fallen asleep. Lily's voice woke me up. She stood in front of me, such a small, seemingly completely nondescript woman, but there was something dazzling about her. Not just beauty in the usual sense, but some kind of special, inexplicable attractiveness. For me, it was like a breath of fresh air after many years spent in a stuffy, musty room. Max, she said softly, Oliver has called you 3 times already. Maybe I should call him back. I propped myself up on my elbows, rubbed my face, and nodded. Yes, it's probably worth it. I looked at Lily and she smiled. We met in her cafe. Lily was the owner of a small but cozy place on the island, where I went on the first day after landing, just to drink coffee and catch my breath. Little did I know then that this chance visit would change my life. That evening, when the cafe was almost closing, we started talking. At first, just about trifles about the weather, about how long I planned to stay on the island. And then, as if something had broken, we told each other everything. She talked about the husband she lost in a car accident while she was pregnant, about how she raised her son alone, how hard it was for her, but she didn't give up. I talked about my past life, about betrayal, about how for a long time I felt like a stranger in my own home. After that, everything happened by itself. I went to the cafe more and more often. Then I began to linger and help with little things. And her son, little Leo, literally never left my side. We built sand forts on the beach, rode bicycles, and learned to race and swim. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly welcome. And one evening, when the three of us were watching some cartoons, I just stayed. We fell asleep on the sofa, and in the morning I woke up and realized that I didn't want to leave anymore. Lily and Eo were only happy. This is how our story began. I looked at her and wanted to take her to bed, but it was daytime, Leo was still awake, and I had to dial Oliver first. Lily, as if reading my thoughts, smiled even wider, handed me the phone and, laughing, ran to her son. But the call still needed to be made. We spoke regularly on the phone, and Oliver was happy to keep me updated on how my former, loving relatives were coping after my disappearance. After I left, their lives immediately went downhill. Isabella, accustomed to luxury, was forced to find ways to pay the bills. For the first couple of months, she still tried to hold on, sharing plaintive stories with friends and hoping for help from those around her. But no miracles happened. Margaret, too, was not used to the new state of affairs and quickly began accusing her daughter of fucking up her main sponsor. Sophia and Andrew, left without comfortable free housing, were forced to move to a worse apartment with Uncle Frank. He suddenly realized that his business ideas, without my contributions, were no more expensive than a roll of toilet paper. The only people I left anything for were my children. I wrote a letter to each of them explaining the reason for my leaving. I knew they probably wouldn't miss me, but the only thing I advised them was to try to look at life from the other side. I left each of them an invoice to pay for their education, a start to their independent life, as well as a monthly minimum payment for living expenses until they came of age. Everything else is in their hands and will depend only on them. I took a deep breath and dialed the number. Oliver answered almost immediately. Speak already. Isabella is now entertaining men for money, brother. Are you serious? Absolutely. I saw her in person. Short skirt, red lipstick, a look that says, I'm ready for anything. And you know what's funny? I recently found out that Margaret's boyfriend had filmed her. She found out, and they started a scandal in public. I was screaming with laughter after this call. Oliver just made my day. Well, you still have fun all night, taking my story to pieces. And I have to go. Lily doesn't like to wait, especially today.